We have Todd Schrader with us today, and additionally, a new face to the Radway Summit is Craig Piercy, who will be our moderator. Craig serves as the CEO of American Nuclear Society, a position he has held since November of 2019. Prior to taking the helm at ANS, he was managing director of the Washington office of the Bose Public Affairs Group, where he built and oversaw a 20-person, 60-client, $5 million a year government affairs, policy, and consultancy specializing in energy, science, and education. He has a bachelor's degree in government and politics from the University of Maryland, College Park, and is a graduate of the Public Affairs Institute. With that, Craig, it's your show.
Well, thank you, Nancy. Good afternoon or good morning, depending upon where you are. As Nancy said, I'm Craig Piercy, and I'm the Executive Director and CEO of the American Nuclear Society. For those of you that may not be familiar, the American Nuclear Society is the primary scientific and technical organization for nuclear technology professionals, both in the U.S. and around the world. We provide news, technical knowledge, professional development opportunities, and scientific fellowship for our 10,000 members in industry, national laboratories, academia, and government. We have 2 annual national meetings, numerous topical conferences, our magazines, Nuclear News and Radway Solutions, and also 3 technical journals. We also have a successful partnership with the Discovery of Education and the Department of Energy to provide nuclear science and technology curriculum to K-12 science teachers across the country. Our goal is simple. We want to get nuclear science and technology in every classroom. We've also launched the ANS Newswire, which provides broad coverage of the nuclear landscape, including the current fleet, advances on the S&T side, and of course, waste management. I encourage you to visit us at ans.org/news. So it's my honor today to introduce our next guest. Todd Schrader serves as the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for DOE's Office of Environmental Management, a position he's held for a little over a year. Prior to becoming EM2, Todd was manager of the Carlsbad Field Office of DOE, where he oversaw the restart of WIP operations. Todd also has experience in other parts of DOE, including the Office of Civilian Radioactive Waste Management, where he led key components of the NRC licensing process for the Yucca Mountain project, and also the Loan Program Office at DOE, where he led technical reviews that resulted in $13 billion in investments. Todd started his career at Hanford, holding various positions, including the True Waste Program Manager. He holds a BA in Mechanical Engineering from the University of Florida, go Gators, and a Master's in Engineering from NC State. So it's my pleasure to welcome Todd Schrader. Todd, over to you.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Nancy. It's great to be here today, virtually in person, and thanks for everyone attending. This is an exciting time for EM in our cleanup mission over the past year. Myself and Ike White have been in a position came in together. Ike has certainly set a tone for us in making progress and carrying on some of the policies of the administration as far as contracts and things like that. We've also made great progress across the site, even across all the sites, even in the COVID environment. So today I'll talk a little bit about where we were and a little bit about where we're going, I think, within EM itself. So I think everyone's familiar. We earlier this year, calendar year, January or maybe a little bit later, February, March timeframe, issued a calendar year mission priorities for Office of Environmental Management. We have our overall mission statement. I think most people are familiar with. It's not the exact words, certainly the general thoughts behind cleanup from the weapons programs and other nuclear energy research within the Department of Energy. With that, I'll talk a little bit about why we chose what we did and what I think next year will look like. A question we often get is why calendar year and not fiscal year? Much of the government runs on fiscal year. And we did that for a couple of reasons. One, frankly not always crystal clear on October 1st what our budget's going to be for the following year. Generally, however, by the time you get to around the holidays, around the first of the calendar year, that gets locked in, and so you have a little bit better idea of what your boundaries are as far as funding and things like that. We chose 5 general areas for priorities. Construction milestones, and this was basically our big capital projects around the complex. It would include obviously Hanford and Savannah River, the waste processing facilities in Idaho, the WIP facility, some of the upgrades we have going on out there. Number 2, execute key projects and enable the cleanup mission. That was to get at the work at other sites around the complex, from big to small. Everything from work at Portsmouth or Paducah to even some of our small sites like Brookhaven or ETEC. Reduce the EM complex footprint. I often joke, I've used this comment before, EM does not stand for enduring mission. Our job is to finish and then to turn the land over to various uses in the future. We work hard with communities, we work hard with the other parts of DOE to enable us to do that and reduce the footprint of EM. And some examples of that would be even in the past, once Rocky Flats or Fernald were done, those were turned over to legacy management and other groups within DOE. If we're at an NNSA site or science site, as we get work done, we turn the land back over to them for future missions and things like that. And so one of the things we work hard is defining the end state, figuring out where we're going, and then finishing the EM mission. Number 4, of course, contracts to enable progress. I think there's been many presentations on the in-state contracts and some of the things we're putting in place just sort of by coincidence. Almost all of the EM contracts will turn over here in the next couple years, 2-3 years. We're just getting to the end points of all of them and have to rebid them. And then 5 was drive innovation, improve mission performance. And some of this was a little bit on the internal side, how we do project and program management, but also in here was the high-level waste interpretation that we talked about. I think people have heard about in the first waste stream we're working at Savannah River on that. My belief is when you see EM calendar year 2021 mission priorities, those same general 5 priorities will be there, but then the underlying ones underneath them will change. We also did try to hit most of the sites around the complex, something in there. However, being a one-page priority document, we couldn't get everything in there. And so I anticipate the same in the future, where it's just a high-level statement. And just because it's not listed doesn't mean it's not important. But for communication purposes, we chose to do that. One of the biggest feedbacks we've gotten on this priorities is more stakeholder engagement coming up in the coming months in order to prepare the documents for the future. And so one of the things we've met with all of or a number of the stakeholder groups, such as National Governors Association, NGA, STIGWIG, ECA, ECOS, and we're trying to get a dialogue to figure out how to get their input into what we're doing moving forward. And we should see some more information in that area in the very near future, I believe. So why now? The EM complex, White has said this more than once, is on an inflection point. We've been in many of our sites under long-term construction projects and bringing projects to bear to get at some of our most challenging waste. At the tank waste at all our sites is difficult. It's hard to get to. The technologies are in general new or if not first of a kind, certainly have not been deployed widely up to this point. What we're seeing now is the results of a lot of hard work from a lot of people over the last decade or longer, bringing these facilities online. For instance, and I'll talk more about this, DF Law is coming along, Savannah River is making progress, Idaho, IWTU is making progress, in some of the other sites. The way we kind of look at it and where the future is, this coming decade, we should see a significant amount of tank waste treated around the complex. We should see a significant reduction in our footprint. We should finish at a number of small sites around the complex. So this is an exciting time, and I think it really helps us to continue to get our message out on what we're thinking our priorities, getting input from stakeholders, frankly, getting input from business communities and the contractor community to help us develop the best contracts and the best priorities moving forward. Now, of course, we are all in a differing work environment around the complex. I think, as with everyone, EM had a significant rollback of on-site activities in mid-March, early April, where we took almost all of our sites to, we called it phase 0. What that meant at each site differed a little bit, based on how many people had to be there, mission essential people. At some sites that might have been literally down to just the guards and some of the safety people. At other sites, there were some missions we had to keep moving and keep going. And so it was a little different at each site. EM developed a framework to describe how we go from phase 0, phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. It was based on the White House and CDC guidance and some of their descriptions they used when we put that out, and we issued that back in the April to May timeframe. Since that time, all of our sites have moved to at least phase 1, and some have moved to phase 2. Now, in some cases, our small sites like a Lawrence Berkeley or Lawrence Livermore, things like that, they'll move with their parent or the larger tenant on the site. So in those cases, Berkeley, once the Office of Science decided the lab was going, we go with them. And so we maintain consistency between sites as we move. At the EM standalone sites, we make those decisions moving forward. The process is rigorous. We look at a number of different key data before we make a move from phase 0 to phase 1, phase 1 to phase 2, or at some point phase 2 to phase 3 in the future. Some of the key things we look at is obviously trends, or number of cases in the community moving in a downward direction. Generally, you look at a 14-day period on that. One that we didn't look at early on, but we've gotten smarter at is cases per 100,000. It's a way to normalize across the country how many cases you have in comparison to everyone else, and it gives you a sense on where you are. I will tell you, sort of the number. One of the numbers we look for is 200 cases per 100,000 over a 14-day period. That is a sort of a key number of trying to get below. And one of the things we look at. We look at the controls that are in place at the sites. Do they have social distancing controls? Do they have PPE? Have they done things like put up plexiglass where they can, put up physical separation, things like that at the site? And of course, local conditions, hospital capability, things like that. Is there orders from the governor? Is there orders from the local county? How are we in compliance with them? At our bigger sites where we have a significant impact on the local community, our site managers work very closely with the local community and health districts and let them know what we're thinking, we hear what they're thinking, et cetera. So it's a very rigorous process to move between phases as we move forward. We've also learned a lot about best practices. Just how to do work on site, how to configure, our engineering systems. I mentioned plexiglass and separation and ventilation and things like that, and learning what works best. Early on, we had made sure that the supply chain for PPE was available and it could support us and was not negatively impacting local communities either. And that issue is mostly cleared up around the complex. Finally, we're assessing, obviously, impacts to schedules. Some activities have been impacted. Obviously, we were not making progress. We did not have people on site doing the work. And so we're looking at those. In some cases around the country, there were regulatory commitments associated with that work. A lot of those agreements, if not all of them, have force majeure type provisions in them that allow for situations beyond the control of the agency, allows us to talk to the regulators and determine the best path forward. Saying that, we've come back, we're making progress. Construction is one of the areas we generally come back from earliest. As you can imagine, outdoor work tends to lend itself a little bit more towards social distancing. And so it's one of the areas we've found that construction's come back a little bit faster than some of the other areas that we work. So around the complex, a few things to talk about. Salt waste processing facility, Savannah River. This is certainly an area of celebration. In August, the department approved the startup of the facility. The contractor gone through the final Department of Energy ORR. Admittedly, it was kind of COVID did impact that schedule a little bit, not too much, but a little bit. But again, as we got a little bit smarter on how we control the work and support the personnel, things are back moving again, and the facility should be operational in the relatively near future. And this is really important because by 2030, with this facility, with the other facilities on site, such as the Defense Waste Processing Facility and some of the on-site disposal options like the saltstone facilities, et cetera, in 10 years, nearly all of the waste, salt waste inventory, and most of the tank waste will be treated at Savannah River. That's a really big deal. That we now have a path to treat basically all of the waste at Savannah River, and it shows us a path to completion. We have the facilities in place, the personnel in place, et cetera. So it'll be an exciting year or exciting decade at Savannah River coming up. It's also, again, I mentioned this sort of theme earlier, it fundamentally shifts the site from construction, preparation, to actual operation and treating waste on a significant basis. I might add also Savannah River. I mentioned earlier the high-level waste interpretation, first waste stream we were looking at that we applied it to came from Savannah River, and that work is actually proceeding quite well right now too. The disposal of a small waste stream there under that while using high-level waste interpretation. Hanford, we have the obviously the direct feed low activity waste approach. This is a multi-facility, multi-contractor effort to get to treating waste out at Hanford. The kind of core facility is the vitrification facility, the low activity waste facility out there. That facility is advancing to completion of construction fairly soon. A number of the support facilities around it, such as the analytical lab at WTP, has already been commissioned. Obviously, many of the balance of facility facilities, such as steam and power and domestic water and all that, they're actually already up and operating. On the other side, in the tank farms, the TISCR system, which is the tank side season removal, that helps prepare the waste and moving waste into the feed tanks, all that work is progressing. So we're really happy on the progress we're making out there. In fact, this is a high priority for the department. I think as evidenced by the secretary himself went out there a few weeks ago to get a firsthand look at progress. So certainly this is an area of focus for us. Again, exciting. There's no reason to believe within the next few years we should be treating tank waste at Hanford also. By the end of the decade, a significant amount of the supernate, the most mobile of the waste that will be treated within the low activity waste system will be treated. So again, exciting times out there at Hanford on this also. One facility I don't have a picture of, but I'll mention IWTU, Integrated Waste Treatment Unit at Idaho. Similarly, it's progressing through final stages of construction, heading towards commissioning. Once that's up online, another facility that within the next decade will treat, if not all, certainly a very significant portion of the waste at Idaho also. So again, another exciting area. Sort of another facility that's very important to what we do, not necessarily treating tank waste, waste isolation pilot plant. They They have started work on the new shaft. This is shaft number 5 out of the site, the utility shaft. They broke ground. They're down to, I believe, 60 feet now. Some of the things, interesting things there, that facility will use both sort of normal mining and a little bit of blasting, which is something a little bit new to EM in a while. I think if they hadn't, in the last couple of weeks, relatively soon, we'll do some of that work to keep drilling down. The shaft itself, almost a half-mile deep. We've started, but they're making great progress out there. Again, also work that lends itself towards social distancing. I mean, the picture itself, you kind of see there's a handful of workers there, and they could be quite far apart as they're doing the waste. And again, we see this at a number of our sites. If they're set up that way, we're able to make a lot of progress moving forward in there. Utility shaft itself is very important. It'll aid in ventilation. And then the shaft itself will be sunk down to the horizon of the repository, and then the access strips to it will be driven back into the main WIP footprint, and it'll allow us to move forward in our future mission out there. Some of the other things at WIP that are happening are the safety significant confinement ventilation system, of course, is being built, and much of the other systems infrastructure around the plant is being recapitalized. If you think about it, WIP's actually been in operation now for almost 30 years. That's sort of the end of life for a lot of systems, fire loops and power transformers and things like that. So the entire site is getting, I'll call it an infrastructure makeover in the next 5 years, as we kind of position it for, another 30 years of operation or somewhere in that time frame as we move forward. And again, the WIP is not only key to the EM cleanup, obviously the waste in Idaho, some of the waste at Hanford and Savannah River and Oak Ridge, but also supports the National Defense Mission. So, it's a key facility for supporting Los Alamos and Lawrence Livermore, and then the NNSA side of Savannah River also. So it's a high priority facility for us, and we want to ensure it's available for a few more decades to go. East Tennessee Technology Park. This is another big victory. This, I believe, if most people look at this picture, they'll realize this is an old picture from a few months ago, because I believe those buildings are down now. This was, our large project to bring down the gaseous diffusion plant there. That was the Vision 2020 effort to basically get that back to a clear field site. As of now, I believe all the buildings are down that were part of the Vision 2020 effort, and there's some final work on some ancillary facilities out there. But this is a big victory. In the fall, I think we will be able to celebrate that we've made the progress we need to out there. So great work by the teams out there, getting us to this point and showing that we can truly remove facilities and return it to a different use. Well, then, as we finish these facilities, look to turn it over to, in some cases, I think, some conservation easements and under Office of Legacy Management. Some of it, I believe, will be turned over to some business interests in the area, and it allows us to transition the land to productive uses for the local community as we move forward. It also means that the highly skilled workforce that has been working on this through the years will now transition to Y12 and the Oak Ridge National Laboratory at the Oak Ridge site in general, and allow us to take down some of the excess or older facilities they have that will enable the mission to move forward for them. In those cases, the land, as we take the facilities down, the land will be transferred back to Officer Science or NNSA for their future missions at the site. And finally, I'll talk about one of our small sites. We won't talk about this site all that often, but out in California, Southern California, ETech, Energy Technology Engineering Center. We have some, the buildings we're responsible for taking down. We were working on, we finally do some negotiations and partnering with the state of California. We were able to move forward with demolition of some of these facilities. 8 of the 10 buildings are now down that we're working on in this phase of the mission. In fact, I often joke with the site manager. He set a record in that Some of the buildings came down in one day. Now, I will freely admit building was generous. In some cases, shed might have been a more proper term, but still, it's progress, and we're proud of what's going on out there in moving forward, frankly, a somewhat long stalled project forward in getting our cleanup done out at that site itself. Some of the other sites, the small sites I'll mention, Moab, their mission's continuing. Interesting, they were the only site to never go below phase 2 because of what they did in a relatively rural area and low case rates. They were able to keep their mission going in moving the mill tailings. Brookhaven, we're moving towards finishing our current EM mission up there and taking stack down. Sandia, a little bit of work, groundwater work, etc. But we continue to make progress across the complex right now, both our large sites and our small sites. So with that, I will turn it back over.
Right. Thanks, Todd. Appreciate it. So we are getting some questions from the audience coming in, but I do want to ask one in the sort of at the top of the Q&A session. So, you've talked about in your presentation and also in EM's recent plan about this notion of an inflection point and that we're reaching an inflection point. Can you, go into a little bit more detail about exactly what that inflection point is? Is sort of the move from construction to operation, and then also talk about what some of the technological innovations and maybe some of the process innovations that have contributed to us getting to that inflection.
Again, like I mentioned, the inflection point. I think if you kind of look at the history of EM, the 30-year history. I would call this our second inflection point. The first sort of decade to 15 years, we're getting our handle on what was the problem, where was the waste, how do you treat it, how do you bring down facilities. And we had really big successful years in the 06, 07, 08 timeframe, bringing down Rocky Flats, closing it, Phenol, now some of the others. Then we moved into the phase of harder technology problems, tank waste. That required a lot more significant technology development. Obviously, probably the biggest area, some of the biggest areas we've made technology improvements in are waste retrieval from tanks. We in partnership with our national labs, have developed a number of technologies to remove, frankly, hardened, almost concrete-like waste in some of the tanks, and then obviously vitrifying and treating it. Some of that technology had to be moved from lab scale to actual deployment scale itself. And so this is, I kind of think of it as, like I said, the second inflection point where now I think we have the path to completion for all of VM's waste. I think most of our technology has been developed. It's not to say we won't need more in accelerating missions, more efficiency, and things like that. But I think the path is mostly there for finishing the mission, although it will take quite some time in some of our sites. I'll say one sort of very immediate area of process improvement, of course, is COVID and learning how to work in that environment. Fortunately, EM comes from a world of contamination control. We understand personal protective equipment. We understand various controls you put in place for spread of in our former case, contamination. But many of those lessons could be also applied to, frankly, pathogens and other things. And so I think that we were somewhat uniquely positioned to work our way through those issues moving forward.
Mm-hmm. So we have had a couple of questions about life in EM during COVID. So a couple of questions I'm going to kind of compress together. One is, currently, what percentage of your workforce is working remotely as opposed to being inside the fence? And are there any overarching lessons that you've learned from COVID that you've been able to apply to the business of environmental management broadly?
Sure. I think more than or much like much of the country, Mike says it too. If you had asked him back in March, could you work telework? could it work really, keep your mission going? I think a lot of people would have had their doubts. However, what we have found is much of the activities actually can work in telework environment. In fact, if anything, we've seen interesting places. Some places we seem to be working even more efficiently than we were before. I mean, certainly in the contract world, we managed to keep things going. So that's sort of a lesson learned that is telework something you can use in the future to attract workers? Is it a way you can become more efficient? Is it frankly, a cost-saving measure? Do you need large buildings and lots of people in it? And that's stuff we're issues that we're looking at right now. Obviously, on the site itself, you can't telework literally taking down a building or things like that. So, those have been the areas that were impacted most. We're bringing personnel back. As far as the percentage, I don't know the percentage, but sort of as a general statement, I'll say I'll call it the back room or the support work. This would be lots of engineering, procurement, things like that. Much of the headquarters work. A significant number of workers are still teleworking out around the country on that. Whereas obviously the work that requires hands-on work, depending on where you are, depending on conditions, depending on the phase of the site, many of those workers have started coming back. But I don't have a specific breakdown.
Sure. Okay, so question on WIP. How soon will WIP have a replacement safety significant ventilation contractor on hand?
Don't know the specifics, and frankly, I don't think we can talk about all the procurement aspects of that. Obviously, it's in the procurement process, but bringing that contractor on hand is certainly a high priority for us. That, as I mentioned, WIP is sort of a key facility for the entire DOE, and that ventilation system will position us to be where we want to be over the next 20, 30 years for the facility. So bringing that subcontractor on hand is certainly a priority for the prime contractor out there. I know they're working hard to do that. I will note that in some cases, even though they're contractors moving to replace the subcontractor, it doesn't mean work has stopped out there. There is some of the work there continuing under different management structures and that type of thing. So we're still continuing to make progress on the project while the prime contractor is moving to replace the subcontractor.
So, I also want to talk a little bit about relationships with states and communities. I know that historically, I was a young congressional staffer working on the Hill on the Energy and Water Appropriations Subcommittee, and learned a little bit about this back in the 90s. That the quality of the agreements and the dialogue that you have with states and communities are really important in being able to make cleanup progress. Tell me a little bit about what's happened recently, and is there anything that sticks out in your mind as either a breakthrough or an analog that you could show to communities to say this is how we work together? Give me an environmental scan of that issue.
Sure. I think I mentioned this before. One of the real keys, I think, with working with the communities is understanding what the end state is. Where do they want the EM mission to end? I think going back sort of Rocky Flats and all to some respect Mound, each of those had a slightly different end state. Mound itself has turned more into a business redevelopment, that type of thing. And that was done working with communities, finding out what do you want at this site moving forward. So I think in the grand scheme of things, that's one of the areas we're having lots of good conversations on. The other, of course, is congressional support. Obviously, we have strong congressional support. I think it's recognized by our budgets that the appropriations that Congress has given us over the last few years. And that starts with the community talking with their local representatives, their senators, their various forms of government, to indicating that EM is making progress. And when we make progress, the community, I think, gets behind it, and that message then goes up to the appropriators and Congress to say, hey, good progress is being made. This is a good use of taxpayer money, out at the site. So I often think it's, we call it the virtuous circle. The more progress we make, it seems like the more support you get, the more funding you get, the more progress you make. And so keeping partnerships with the local community and us delivering on the promises of getting the work done, I think certainly help in that area.
Well, and a related question there. So one of the audience members happened to note that in addition to your work for EM, you've worked on WIP, you've worked on Yucca Mountain. There is a parallel issue with high-level waste disposal. Are there any lessons that you've seen in the EM process that could potentially be helpful to our efforts to finally get a workable solution to high-level waste, civilian high-level waste?
Where the country moves in that area, I we'll see. That obviously will require some decisions, different policy decisions. One of the lessons I think, or what we can do at least on the EM side, is be prepared whenever those decisions or whenever final paths are laid out, and that means putting the waste into waste forms that will meet what we believe waste acceptance criteria for various facilities, getting our in some cases a small amount of spent nuclear fuel that we have, or spent nuclear fuel we have at some sites. It means getting our what will eventually be high-level waste into a waste form that can be acceptable at the sites. Where a national repository or where final paths are, we'll see. That's outside of the EM mission itself. And so I will leave those questions to others.
Mm-hmm. So more of a general open-ended question. You've been in the job for about a little over a year now. What's the thing that surprised you most about the job that you didn't expect coming into it?
I think what surprises me a little is there's always a surprise, and by that I mean maybe getting too full of myself or something. I thought, I know this EM mission, I got this figured out, and yet every day I'll hear something in the site, I'll hear something, and I'll say, but wait, you do what? I've never heard of this before. So it's at some level a bit humbling to realize there's just so much good work and so many good people and frankly issues at sites that certainly broadened myself. I mean, I felt like this last year was an absolute year of learning. My boss, Ike White, has said the same thing. Just that, he said it. He has fun at work every day. It's interesting, the new challenges, and so I would say that's the biggest one. It's just all the challenges that are there, and the fact that hopefully we can make progress on them moving forward.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to belie a little bit of my ignorance, or at least my departure from the EM side for some period of time. You've seen this maturation of contract type vehicles, where in the 90s, you had these big fixed price contracts, and now it's IDIQ. I mean, tell me generally about how you see the nature of EM's approach to contracting changing going forward.
Certainly, you see the in-state contracts that will the ones that are currently sort of in the procurement process or recently awarded generally tend to be in the IDIQ realm. So define the scope, not over the 10-year period or 15-year period or 5-year period, whatever the contract period is. And instead, at smaller chunks to get the work done. But I think the other key, I think, when looking at the contract structure is, more than anything, DOE and EM and we, the customer, have to decide, what do we want done? What is the scope of work done? And I mentioned before, and it kind of gets back to this whole inflection point. The finish line is sort of visible now for a lot of these sites. And so we're able to, I think, define work a little bit better. And I think that more than anything helps in the contracts, in the case of IDIQs that we're moving towards. I think you'll still see, depending on the site and everything, there'll be a mixture, where we go based on the specifics of the site. But certainly the bigger area we're working on right now are the IDIQs. But I don't think it's not truly one size fits all. And you know, each site will look at their history and what they've done and how they've operated and what is sort of the right mechanism. But the real key is us defining the scope that we want done under that. And I think we're getting a lot better at that.
Mm-hmm. Good. Well, I'm not showing any other questions here. Do you, Todd? Anything else that you just want to wrap up before we finish?
No, I will say this is a partnership. We talk about EM, but we would not be where we are without the all our contractors around the complex who do a really good job planning work and executing work. The workforce itself, obviously. They're the people who day in, day out do the work, and we would not be here without them. And so, you know, certainly thankful for everything they do and the work they do, and in particular over the last few months, the challenging work environments, the fact that people have found ways to get work done, I think just shows the quality and capability of our both our contractor and our workers themselves around the complex. So I'll say thank you to all of them, and say we would not be here today without what they did and their contributions.
Indeed. Well, Todd, thank you very much for taking the time to speak today, and I will turn it over to Nancy Berlin for the upcoming program notes. Here you go. Thank you.
Once again, Todd, Craig, excellent session. I've been waiting for a long time for EM to have this amount of success stories. So it's always good to hear that you're going forward and not backwards. And one day you will be on the stage and you will say, we've decided to open Yucca Mountain, because between my editor and myself, that's our long running joke that we have. And he's always said, you know, he'll be buried in Yucca Mountain. So that's another use for it. But anyway, really, truly, truly, thank you for sharing your expertise with our audience. For any audience members who maybe came in the middle, all of these sessions will be available on demand at the end of today. So you'll be able to, hey, well, what was it that he said? You'll be able to replay it for you. And you could be like me and have old eyes, and I want to look at the presentation one more time because I couldn't see it on this little tiny screen in front of me. So on that happy note, thank you, Todd. Thank you, Craig. Our next session on the National Nuclear Security Administration Prioritization Update will begin at 1:15. Thank you very much.